Reimagining Success, episode 384. And this week, I'm walking you through something I wish someone had laid out for me clearly when I was first thinking about leaving corporate: the full range of options beyond the traditional 9 to 5. So, this is for you if you're stuck in the binary of stay or go and can't quite see what else is possible, or if you've already made a move and you're wondering whether you landed in the right model for where you are right now. Welcome to Reimagining Success, the podcast that helps you build a profitable business as an independent expert, one that works for you and your lifestyle. I'm your host, Anna Lundberg, former corporate insider turned business mentor, executive coach, and mum of two. Whether you're a solopreneur, a coach, speaker, consultant, I'm here to guide you in creating a business that gives you freedom, flexibility, and the fulfillment you're looking for. Ready to redefine success and build a business that you love? Let's get started. So last week we talked about why so many women in particular, although also men, are leaving traditional employment. This week, what actually comes next? Because it's not just stay or go. It's really important to see that it's not a binary choice. There's a whole menu of options in between and beyond, and most people just don't even know that half of them exist. We've always framed career decisions, I find, as binary. We're employed or we're self-employed. It's safe or it's risky. You're in or you're out. But that framing, I think, is what keeps us stuck, because we stay in something that isn't working because the only alternative we can see feels too big a leap. Or we leap and then create the same problems in a different container. So my first book, Leaving the Corporate 9 to 5, mapped 5 different paths. So it talked about changing sector away from corporate, maybe into charity or non-profit or something, or into startups, even working for another startup, going freelance, starting your own business, having a portfolio career, which is basically what I've done, and also just taking a leap of faith and not really knowing what you want to do yet. But today I'm going to talk through an even more nuanced and full menu with some honest trade-offs, to be honest, of each, because everything has an advantage and a disadvantage. But the question always is, what kind of business or what kind of career are you building for you and your life? It's very different as a one example. One big distinction that I've experienced is, okay, a lot of the business advice is for you when you're building a company as a product that's going to be sold one day, let's say, versus for most of my clients and for me, the business is a container for my best work in my actual life. So I'm the expert. I want to do fulfilling work. I'm not building something anonymous that I'm then going to sell on. And that kind of question can really help you know which options are going to be relevant to you. Okay, so let's first look at variations on employment, right? Before even going independent, there are lots of options that most people overlook. So again, I mentioned changing sector. You can move from high pressure corporate into social enterprise, B Corp, public sector, academia. You can be using the same transferable skills, but a completely different culture, different values fit. And I think this is often underestimated as a genuine alternative, right? You don't have to chuck it all in and go off and live in a van. You can, but you don't have to. You can just change into a different container. I think that's something really to consider, especially if you have a pull towards a particular sector. So I studied international relations and development economics and so on, originally wanted to work at the UN. So that was the initial drive for me, was to work more in those kinds of organizations. Now I look to work, in fact, I did a social enterprise course years ago, I'm reminded. I'm ashamed that I've let go of that, but that's something I could bring back. And I do target quite a few B Corp now, because I really want to work with organizations that whose values I share, basically, right? But you could move into a full-time role in one of those organizations. I just said full-time. Who gets to decide that 40 hours is full-time, by the way? Henry Ford, I guess. But you can move to part-time. And there's a great hashtag on LinkedIn, hashtag part-time works. So more compressed weeks, perhaps the 4-day week. I have several people who I know who work a 9-day fortnight. Maybe you do job sharing at senior levels. So you're still employed, but you have that structural flexibility built in. And I think that can work really much better than perhaps you expect when it's negotiated properly and when it's designed to really work for you. Then there's remote first, or maybe sort of async heavy roles, right? It can decouple your work from the location and the strict hours without changing your employment status. So you have de facto autonomy without having to actually take the leap. And let's not forget a bit more nuanced intrapreneurship. You can carve out a kind of semi-autonomous unit or a new product inside a large organization. So you get the entrepreneurial challenge with a corporate safety net. I know there are big FMCG giants who have, that's a tautology, big giants, but there you go. Who have, created little sort of incubators for startup-y companies. And if you're able to, within the framework of a big P&G, Unilever, whatever, work on one of those, obviously you get sort of the best of both worlds, potentially. So I think that's a really underused option for people who want to build, but aren't necessarily ready to be fully on their own. I didn't quite have that, but to be honest, in my final full-time corporate role, I was head of digital, and because it was still quite a new thing and I was quite separate from the rest of the organization, I kind of was able to be quite entrepreneurial. And in fact, that was probably what gave me the confidence and the door to go out on my own. But you don't have to, is what I'm saying here again, right? You can have that challenge within the corporate container. Now, obviously, these options depend entirely on the organization being willing, and many aren't, but they are worth exploring before assuming that the only exit is going to be the full, again, binary leap. So those are variations on staying within employment, but changing sector, going part-time, going more remote, or even developing that kind of entrepreneurial role within the company. Then, look, I think most of us sit more now on the independent expert spectrum. And still, there's so much more nuance here than I think we realise. So a lot of people, when I first started working, were sort of in a classic freelancer role. You're selling time, deliverables on short contracts, often embedded into client teams. You charge a day rate or it's project-based. The danger here, I think, is it can drift towards just another employee without benefits. And certainly a lot of companies want to treat us that way. And the trap can be that you're kind of busy and you're still basically an employee, but you're not building anything. You're not as autonomous as you want to be. You're still beholden to those clients. Maybe there's a cap on what you can charge and so on, especially if you're charging by the hour. But there are amazing freelancers doing amazing work. So that is 100% still an option. The kind of positioning I talk about, I guess, is more independent expert, which what does that actually mean? But it's having a narrower positioning and higher leverage, I'd say. So you've got your own IP, intellectual property, frameworks. It might be group programs, facilitation, speaking, advisory work. So you have more control over your calendar and your model. And again, that's sort of where I sit. Now, fractional, some people have said, oh, it's just, consulting or part-time with a different name. And I would disagree, although it might just be semantics. But being a fractional executive, CFO, CMO, COO, sitting inside a leadership team, maybe 1, 2, 3 days a week across several clients. You then have clear accountability for particular outcomes without the full-time headcount, right? So the company benefits from your expertise and experience, even though they probably can't afford a full-time employee. And for you, you get the stability and you get the sort of more end-to-end involvement in projects and the team and a lot of the things that otherwise you might miss from being in a corporate role. Demand for fractional executives grew 46% year on year in 2024, and I can imagine it's only growing more, especially as scale-ups realise that they can access senior expertise, again, without those full-time salaries. So the key distinctions may be, freelancing is traditionally time for money. Independent expert is more expertise and IP for money. Fractional is leadership accountability in kind of slices of time, I suppose. They're pretty different models and they require and allow for different lifestyles, a different ceiling on earnings. So again, I'm an independent expert. I think I call myself a consultant initially, although effectively it was kind of contracting, arguably as a freelancer, sort of almost employee. So it took me some time to learn that distinction too. But it is a distinction that matters. It matters for pricing, it matters for positioning, and it matters for sustainability. Okay, so that's sort of the spectrum of independent experts. I talk about solopreneur here, and I think that's perhaps misleading because it can more go into kind of the business path, but we'll talk about that in a moment too. The next one is kind of portfolio and hybrid careers. And I say a lot more people than we realise probably land here. It's something I've talked about for years. And I would say actually that this is truthfully where I sit. And I think that's probably the section from my first book that has aged best because portfolio careers, hallelujah, have gone mainstream. So effectively, it's kind of several job titles at once. You might be mixing employment, freelance, side business, or other income streams simultaneously. In practice, it might look like, I don't know, let's say part-time functional role plus consulting, or teaching or mentoring alongside client work, speaking and advisory plus a program maybe, or maybe even a passion project, alongside a day job. And I've talked a lot about the seasons of life, and a portfolio can look different depending on what life demands. So my current school hours portfolio, what I'm running now, is different to a big push portfolio when, health and family load maybe is lighter, or a sabbatical portfolio when you need to recover and recalibrate. You can kind of turn up and turn down the dials. But the truth is that a portfolio career requires more active management than a single job or single offer business. The danger is that it gets super complex. So the freedom is real, but so is the complexity. It certainly doesn't run itself. And it can mean, and has been honestly the struggle I've always had, that, I'm doing B2C and B2B. It means you've got two different targets, two different messages, and it almost becomes two businesses on top of each other. So the key here, I've always said, is having a really coherent umbrella message and a way to kind of make it all. They talk about a marketing flywheel now, so to make it really work coherently, cohesively, rather than doubling your workload, which is not good, especially if you've got 3 or 4 things, then that's out of control. So that's kind of more portfolio and hybrid. There's no exact definition, but it means doing multiple things, right? Then, okay, let's talk about the startup-y business piece, because again, there's an important distinction here that often gets conflated in entrepreneurship. So there's the kind of VC-backed startup, right? Hyper growth, exit focused, board oversight, aggressive targets. You trade equity and control for capital. Your calendar is not yours. Risk is performance-based. This is not what most of my audience, I'd say, wants, but it is worth naming it so that you can consciously rule it out. And a lot of the advice that we get from kind of entrepreneurial gurus and experts is more directed to that kind of business, right? How do you get the investment? How do you get the exit? You're going to work harder than you ever did in your full-time job and so on. There is a slight distinction there with angel investor funded, right? Smaller checks, but more flexibility. I have a colleague, a friend who has angel investors, and she said it's so different because they just want to sort of invest the money, they believe in your thing, and then they let you generally run with it and do your own thing. So more flexibility, but it is still growth and exit oriented, right? So it's kind of a halfway house, I guess you could argue. Bootstrap business, funded by savings and revenue. You keep the control. You can still optimize for profit, but also your values. You're scaling more slowly. There's a bigger personal financial risk, but you also have genuine autonomy because you're not beholden to those investors and you don't have to have that board and oversight and so on, right? And then finally, again, this is more the solopreneur, independent expert micro firm. So you're bootstrapped, but you're not a startup. And this is why I always struggle with the language I use. So it's expertise led. For me, it's built around a life, not an exit. Success metrics become, and that's where, again, I've talked about the 4-hour workday, sort of income per hour, the depth of your work, the autonomy, not headcount or valuation. So I'd say most of us, again, are building that option without perhaps realizing what exactly is the name of it or what the model is, right? So it's important to see that is what we're building, not the big business that we're going to sell on or exit from, and so on, right? So it's really important, again, to come back to what are you building and why. Obviously, I was going to say, obviously, there are less obvious options. So less obviously possibly is the right way to say that. We could have a deliberate sabbatical, right? It's not an undefined void, but it's kind of a structured experiment. So either perhaps you've taken a redundancy package or you've ended a contract or whatever it is, right? You could say take 6 months to test 3 career hypotheses. You might shadow, you might do some short contracts and stints, you might take a course, and probably that's kind of both underused and under-respected as a course, as a path to choose, but it's just such a smart way to test. Do I want to go out on my own? Again, I had people I talked to for my book and for my podcast who initially thought they wanted to do that. They had one idea, the idea didn't do so well, and actually they realized, no, but I miss the team and I want to work within the safety of a corporate umbrella. So that's great. Then they've learned that without too much risk, no regrets, and they've just had an amazing experience. It doesn't have to be burning all your bridges and going off in one direction and hoping for the best, right? You don't have to have it all figured out. So consider more structured experiments. And it's something we can do in a smaller way in our business ongoing. I can go, okay, I've got this idea for a community. I've got this other idea for this kind of program. Let's test those in parallel and see where the traction gets, where I get traction. So a more deliberate sabbatical is definitely an option. There are kind of returnships. I think they're called sort of structured re-entry programs for people who've taken a break, maybe parental leave. There's definitely more and more of these available in finance, tech, professional services. Again, possibly something that you do consider. It's not something that I do, but co-founding a business or two independents working together into a boutique kind of firm, or an expert partnering with an operator. It's really helpful to have someone else. If you're the big strategy person, then to have someone who's more the operations, or if you're the marketing sales person and they're more the techie, let's say, or vice versa. And it's kind of somewhere in between the solo and the startup. You don't have to be by yourself. Again, it works really well when skills and values genuinely complement each other. It's really common, and I don't want to rain on this too much. I've just had so many conversations with people where it has gone sour. But there are unicorns where it's gone really well and it's been incredible. Even if it doesn't last forever, it's perhaps given them the confidence and experience to then go off and do something themselves. So that's something to consider. And then, more productized, asset-based paths, so books, courses, templates, tools that really try to decouple your earning from hours to different degrees. And all of those things can kind of supplement any of the above, right? So my books don't bring in millions, but obviously the more books you sell each month, you've got a little bit of passive income. I have a client who's made $250,000 with his books. So there are definitely people who can make more. And having some little products is a great sort of step in the funnel anyway, but it is it's a fun, creative thing to do. And if you do it well, there are people out there who do it very well, and their whole business is, in fact, those productized things. But that's where the sort of the passive income becomes a bit dangerous territory when we think we're just going to be able to sit there while the money rolls in. Okay, so might want to listen to this again if you're sort of, oh my gosh, I'm so confused, there's so many options, but a few decision prompts if you are considering these, whether you're at the beginning or if you're further along, you're like, oh, what exactly am I building here? So, for example, do you want investors in your calendar? Because if not, then you rule out the VC angel piece. Do you enjoy managing people, or do you want to stay close to the work, right? That affects whether you're going to be an expert yourself and maintain that doing the work, as it were, or if you're happy to become a leader and have someone else do the work for you. That sort of startup versus expert. Do you need income stability immediately, or do you have runway to build? But obviously that affects how you sequence things. What does your life actually look like right now? If you know me, this is the key question to ask, right? Kids, health, location, energy, it really affects which season you're in. And again, the question I started with, are you wanting to build something to sell one day, or are you building a container for your work and your life? And that's the real fundamental frame. So there are no right answers here. And if you don't want to do what I'm doing and what I sort of teach and mentor on, then there are others who can help you with other paths. But answering these questions really honestly can really help you make the menu that's available to you much clearer. Okay. So again, if I, and sorry if you've heard this many times, but if you're new, then this is my own journey, I suppose. I started in corporate, as I think I mentioned, having studied something completely different. So I left 2013 and I landed on my feet with digital marketing consulting. I'd been in digital, and it was, you could call it all sorts of things: consulting, contracting, freelancing. I wouldn't say freelancing, strictly speaking. Essentially, I came in almost like a sort of a temporary employee, right? That was what it was set up, but without the benefits, I should add. And then I would travel in between. So that worked really well as a step out of corporate. Then I discovered coaching. I went through what I call my hippie phase. Wasn't earning a huge amount of money, but really leaning into sort of the flexibility, the freedom, and what I was passionate about. A few years later, I was kind of settling alongside my partner. I had a 9-to-5 job in London, so I restructured my work and took the money side a bit more seriously around his hours. Then the kids and COVID and so on, 2019, 2020 is when my children were born, and moving down to the sea. And the model, I hope you can hear, has shifted with each season. So it's not a linear leap. These were models and nuances that I wasn't even aware existed when I first left. And I think I was very naive at the time. But these have been a series of choices in response to what life demanded. So really important, you don't have to know the whole path. You have to know the next right move, given who you are and what your life looks like right now. So again, my first book, Leaving the Corporate 9-to-5, is a great resource if you're kind of mapping your options right now. If you're further along and actually building, then my second book, outside of the 9-to-5, is much more about how you can do that, working through the 5 pillars of a profitable and enjoyable business. Okay. I think I mentioned this last week, but if you are working through what that next chapter looks like and want support figuring out the model that fits your life, I do have something new coming. So just message me. You can get me at podcast@onestepoutside.com. You can message me on socials, Anna Lundberg. Hopefully you'll find me on LinkedIn in particular. Or if you are subscribed to my newsletter, you can just reply there. But I have a few different things coming. So yeah, looking forward to supporting you if that's the right move for you. So thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Bye for now. If anything in today's episode resonated and you're at a moment where you're questioning what's next, whether that's how you're working, what you're building, or whether the life you've designed still fits, I have a limited number of free clarity calls each month. You can go to onestepoutside.com/call. That's onestepoutside.com/call. Come and have a conversation.